Hello aspirants and welcome again to Legacy IAS Academy. In this lecture, we will be discussing what the judgment of a US International Trade Court has given with respect to Trump's tariffs. So yes, previously we have covered the tariff war between US and China, and then there was a 90-day pause. So we'll see all that, and subsequent to which there was a case that was going on in the US Court of International Trade, which has recently given a judgment saying that it would struck down Donald Trump's tariffs, which were imposed on different countries, including China, Canada, as well as Mexico. So this is the news. The news talks about the US court, which had held on Wednesday, that is on 28th May, that President Donald Trump's tariffs of April 2nd. So since April 2nd specific, the day April 2nd is very specific because that's the day when the tariffs started shooting up. So the tariffs of April 2nd on certain countries, those countries are China, Mexico, and your Canada. Now why China in focus over here? Because with China the tariff war started. Now US did impose tariffs on Mexico and Canada as well, but there was no as such a war that Canada or Mexico started with USA, but China did. So much so that because of that war, the ultimate imposition of tariffs by US on Chinese products went up to 145%, and the tariff imposed by China on USA went up to 125%. So this was the situation. Now these tariffs have been struck down by this court. The court has also ruled against the tariffs that were imposed on Canada, Mexico, and China previously as well. So April 2nd is when it shot up massively, but this process had started previously as well. What I mean to say is this 145% was not overnight. Initially, the percentages were 20% and 20%. China was imposing 20% tariff and USA also 20%. This was the normal. This was the norm. From this, USA increased to 34%, then went on to 104%, and then went on to 45%. So first 34% was increased. On 2nd of April it went to 104 and subsequently 105, and then there was counter from China. When it reached 105, China countered with 84. When it reached 145, it countered with 125%. So this is the tariff war which we are talking about. Now the court has ruled against the imposition of tariff by USA. We are dealing with only USA. This international trade court that we are talking about, it is a US court. So it is US's international trade court for international trade, right? It is not talking anything about China because it has nothing to do with China. It is a domestic court of US for international trade of US. I hope that's clear. Now, once this happened, there is more onto this news. What more? The Court of International Trade did strike off the tariffs, but immediately what happened, the Court of Appeals, of course, if you are not satisfied by the decision, you can appeal in the appellate tribunal, appellate court. So the Court of Appeal immediately allowed Trump to continue these tariffs temporarily. That means what? The Court of International Trade struck this down, but immediately the Court of Appeal allowed these tariffs to continue temporarily till the Court of Appeal gives its own judgment. So presently the tariff still remain in force. However, few days back, USA and China had come to an agreement that for the next 90 days they will pause the tariff war that is going on and come back to normalcy. Now, what is this case all about on which the judgment has been given? So what happened is 12 US states that included the state of New York, New Mexico, Connecticut, and Arizona. So these 12 states, they challenged the tariff as well as 5 small businesses. So 5 small businesses along with these 12 states challenged the tariff that were being imposed. Now, so there were 2 cases, one by the small businesses and one by the states of USA. What the court did is, court combined the 2 cases, right? So it combined the 2 cases of the 12 states as well as the small businesses they were there. Now, What did the state say? Why did the state have issue? The states of USA said that this tariffs that have been imposed by Donald Trump is putting a burden on the states because the additional tariffs are being required to pay by the states. So the burden of paying the tariffs on imports fell on the states of USA. What imports? See, when USA is imposing tariffs, what is happening? The burden of paying those tariffs is coming on to the states, is what the states have argued. At the same time, their second argument was that when Donald Trump went on to impose these tariffs, one of the reasoning that were given was to address the drug cartels specifically with its border to Mexico. It was specifically to address that. However, these tariffs went on randomly for every other products and were not specific to targeting the drug cartels, is what it said. So whatever reason Donald Trump gave was not justified and the burden was coming on the states of USA. That is why they went to the court to get this removed. Right? So once the case reached the court had to decide on fundamental questions. So what was the question in front of the court? The key question under the court's consideration was about president's emergency powers on economic matters, and if those powers like talked about or included the power to impose such retaliatory tariffs or not. So it wanted to analyze how much emergency power that the president has, and does this power also include the power to impose retaliatory tariff or not, is what was being discussed. By whom? It was being discussed by the US Court of International Trade. So what is this US Code of International Trade? It is present for the judicial review of civil actions. When you talk about civil actions, the taxations, the tariffs, the monetary things are going to be included over here. It is of international trade. That is why these issues should arise out of the import transactions and federal transactions that affect the international trade. So it will be related to the international trade, not the domestic one. This is what the function of this particular court is. It also ensures that there is uniformity in judicial decision making is present, because different states are there, so there needs to be a uniformity. That is what the task of this court is all about. Now, what is the ruling of the court and what is going to happen now? So, for example, the ruling and subsequent to which what will happen. Presently, it is sub judice in the Court of Appeal. But going forward, what can happen is also what we will analyze. The court has simply said the question in the two cases, both the cases which were clubbed, the question was whether the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1997 delegate these powers to the president for imposing the tariffs, retaliatory tariffs or not, is what was being discussed. So the court simply said that they do not confer such rights. So here Donald Trump has exceeded the rights given to him when he was imposing the retaliatory tariff. And what reason was given? The reason given by the court was that in the early 20th century, the World War was there, the Great Depression was there, which was an emergency kind of a situation. At that particular point of time, US president's power over economic matters, whether it is foreign or domestic, at that time it had that power. So during the time of world wars, during the time of Great Depression of 1929, at that time under the emergency provision, certain powers were given to the US, wherein at that case, if it was that situation or scenario, the president could have. But later on, once those situations subside, in 1977, what had happened is these powers under the IEEPA were once again curtailed. So it was only momentary during the world wars and the Great Depression. Later on, it was curtailed. So as it stands presently, Donald Trump cannot impose the tariffs which it imposed, cannot impose such retaliatory tariffs and go into the tariff war which Donald Trump has presently done. I hope this is clear. So that is what the court has talked about. So clearly Donald Trump has probably what has done is exceeded. However, that cannot be still considered as a final judgment, because what happened subsequent to that is the Court of Appeal has temporarily allowed that to happen. Its matter is sub judice, and probably Donald Trump is also going to move the Supreme Court if the Court of Appeal does not give a judgment in its favor. In fact, he has tweeted also that this decision is terrible for the country is what he has said, and he has said that probably the Supreme Court, he has faith in Supreme Court that it will overturn this ultimate decision. Now, why he talked about the Supreme Court and not the Court of Appeal? Because Supreme Court is the ultimate court. Even if the Court of Appeal gives a decision which is not suitable to Donald Trump, he can still move. The Supreme Court will be the final authority. Once the Supreme Court says this, there is no court above the Supreme Court. So he is having hopes in the final court, that is the Supreme Court of the United States of America. So as it stands, so what is going to happen now is, as it stands, the tariffs remain, the matter is sub judice. After that, it can go to the Supreme Court as well, and then there is no court above it. So Supreme Court's decision would be probably full and final. Thank you.